first of all, your reaction to this. We're waiting for the government to put a number on it. Is this worrying you this morning?
Laura, how are you? I think it is a concern. I think it's a concern because what we're looking at here is a government proposal to implement a fix, and I'm using that word quite advisedly, to a problem that they created. Back in January, former Minister Claire O'Neill implemented a directive on visa processing at the start of the year, which has had massive consequences and unintended consequences across the Australian economy, costing us at least $4 billion to date. And now we've got additional overreach proposed and changes that are being proposed and layered in before we've even had an opportunity to see the damage that intervention has done.
Yeah, I was talking to the Premier, Peter Malinauskas, in your state just last week, and he was saying that, if housing's the issue, in South Australia, for example, there's a 10% vacancy rate for student accommodation in South Australia.
Exactly. So students and international students have been held up as somehow causing an Australian housing problem. There's no evidence to support that. The Property Council have come out and said the same thing. It's simply not the case.
Okay, so we have a little bit more information. We know that regional unis are going to get a bit of a boost here. But what's the material effect of this cap, David?
I think the utility of the word boost is an interesting one, because what we're talking about here is a proposal to take enrolments and caps back to 2019, which is 5 years ago. And somehow that's seen as a progressive thing. We're dealing with the second largest export industry in the country, and surely that there's a recognition that the growth in exports is something that Australia wants. It supports research and innovation. It supports the economy. We've got the Business Council of Australia. We've got Tourism Australia. We've got all of these other areas outside of the universities saying that this is a bad idea, and it's still being progressed.
Yeah, it's crazy, actually. And it's regions that are concerned about this as well. James Cook University in Townsville, for example, they're concerned about basically less international students means less money. And that means less money going into things like R&D. So there's a big funding gap here. The government hasn't offered to fill it anyway, have they?
No, and I only have to turn my mind back to what happened during the pandemic when there were no international students, that the government had to find an extra $1 billion to fund research that wasn't being funded by the institutions themselves. So I can just see that happening again. If you think about the region's vibrancy in our communities, the way in which we support local economies, they all hinge on successful and sustainable institutions.
Yeah.
Universities are really now in financial dire straits as we go into this coming year. And this is just another whack for us.
David, one final question here. This seems like a solution to a Melbourne and Sydney problem in many ways that has been rolled out over the rest of the country. I mean, University of Western Australia, they've got to be jumping up and down about this as well.
I think it's a blunt instrument intervention, which is going to have consequences that impact all sorts of universities. Whether it's going to solve, particular issues in local jurisdictions is yet to be seen. All I can tell you is that, as if I was waking up in another institution in another capital city today, and I had to try and deal with the impost which is about to be put upon me in my next year's financial statements, I'd be looking at how I employ people, and that's the bottom line.
So that's the bottom line. People start to be sacked.
I think that's going to be inevitable in some institutions.
Yeah. And then you're going to have a brain drain, right? So you're going to have some accomplished professors that'll be looking at the writing on the wall here, worried, and we might lose them overseas.
To be honest, I'm more concerned about the signal it sends to students and about Australia being a welcoming place. I mean, as I said, this is the second largest export industry in this country. It's the only one we don't dig out of the ground. 86% of the students who take their education in Australian universities return to their home countries. Right? So it's almost a perfect industry, and we're making an intervention which will say to them, don't come.
And I'm sure this has been communicated behind closed doors. And what has been the answer? Nothing.
It's been communicated not just behind closed doors, but you've seen it play out in the Senate committee over the last number of days as well. The interventions are not welcomed. I think it's clear that this is a political play which is about migration, and putting international students into the migration crosshairs is just simply misleading.
David, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Laura.